Last speaker for today is Tan Zihao. He lives and works in Malaysia, but is currently working on his PhD in Southeast Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore. He's a multidisciplinary conceptual artist who works predominantly in installation and performance art. And Zihao's work is in the Singapore Art Museum and is located in a zone called an Endless of Beginnings, which deals with time. So, Zihao.
Hi, thank you. I'll jump straight into the work. Perhaps we can start with a Malay riddle. This Malay riddle is taken from the book Spirit of Wood by Farish Noor and Edin Khoo. It reads, berbelalai bukan gajah, bermahkota bukan raja, bersisik bukan ikan, apakah dia? In English, it reads, it has a trunk, but it's not an elephant. It has a crown, but it's not a king. It's scaly, but it's not a fish. What is it? So basically, the riddle refers to a composite mythical creature called Makara. Of course, what you see on the screen here is a skeleton, is an imagined skeleton of a Makara. When we think about composite creature, we usually think about examples such as chimeras or the Egyptian Sphinx, but actually, Makara is not that uncommon, even in Singapore. So I took a walk around Singapore and find some of these pictures. Over here, you can see there's this composite mythical creature, Makara, located at the edge of an arch. This is found in Little India. From afar, the two green creatures that you can find at the corners of the arch, located beside the two female deities, those are called Makaras. Basically, it's a combination of elephant trunk or crocodiles, and sometimes, depending on cultures, you have also dragons, you have the fish of a tail. Here you get a more whole picture of the Makaras of Makara located right beside the deity. Over here you can see the trunk of an elephant also, and the tail that looks a bit like a peacock tail. And other than Indian temples that you find in Singapore, you can also see Makaras in Patani. This is also another picture taken from Spirit of Wood. It's actually a decorative element of a palanquin. This one in the Thai temple, located at the entrance. This is what is usually commonly known as the Naga-Makara combination, and they're used to decorate the balustrades at the entrance of a temple. As well as in Prambanan, you'll find Makaras located at the entrance. Now, these images of Makaras, they look a little bit different from one another, but one thing that is common throughout is that a Makara has to be a combination between aquatic as well as terrestrial animals. And it's for this reason that they are creatures in transition, right? They're located at the entrances. Sometimes they're used to decorate water spouts because they are creatures that is located at the demarcation between the interior as well as the exteriors. So they trespass between different geographic as well as cosmic territories. In Southeast Asia, as well as in India, we call it Makara. It's a Sanskritic term, which if you look through the Sanskrit dictionary, it means crocodile. But some scholars attribute its meaning to more abstract terms such as it means many, right? It means multiplicity. Now, if you trace further back, further north in Asia, you will find similar composite creatures, similar composite imaginings, but they're called in a different name. They're called Suwen, or Mojie, or Shachihoko in Japan. Now, actually, if you look at some of the Chinese temples in Singapore, you'll find Ciwen located at the edge of the roof temple. This one. So you can see the difference here. While the Indian varieties of Makara is a combination of a crocodile and elephant, the Chinese variety of Makara is actually a combination of a fish and a dragon. Over here you can see an obvious combination of a fish and dragon in Hong Kong. This is from Japan. So I'm interested in Makara not only because it's a composite of different animals, of different parts of animals. I'm also interested in Makara as a common visual language that kind of transcends different areas. It's a composite of connections. Now, what do I mean by connections? I mean it literally as well as metaphorically. Now, if you look at this picture, Makara is a connection in that it sort of spews out disgorged different life forms. Over here, as I've shown you in the earlier pictures from the Thai temple, in Laos you can also find this figure of a serpent, the Naga, sort of disgorged out of the mouth of Makara. So Makara is basically creating new life forms. It's also connecting different life forms altogether. Now, sometimes the idea of self-regeneration can get more exciting. Over here, you have a Makara spewing out another Makara, spewing out another creature. In this case, it's a lizard-like creature called Mom. And it's also a familiar sight in Nepal. You have a Makara disgorging a crocodile, disgorging a fish. And notice here that the trunk, the elephant trunk of the Makara kind of morphs into a bird-like creature. So in this state of spewing out life form, in this state of regeneration, Makara is also in a constant state of transformation and becoming. In a study by Frederick Bosch in 1960, he noticed the similarities between some of the foliations as well as the shape and the form of Makara. Especially if you look at the way the trunk kind of shaped into an S, a shape of an S, right? On your left, you find this foliation, which kind of swirls and curves like the trunk of the Makara. Now, these similarities are not just coincidental, right? Craftsmen and artists, they're interested in more decorative forms of Makara, begins to create a much more abstract idea of this creature. In Java, you can find a much more vegetated kind of Makara. You can see that the elephant trunk, it's kind of buried within this several kinds of tendrils. And in Malaysia, in Malay wood carvings, if you're familiar with those language with the aesthetics of Malay wood carvings, you'll find that what we call the sulur bayung or the sulur bayur is actually a transformation of Makara. Because of Islamic influence, so the fauna animals, basically, they are discouraged from Malay arts. So you have over here, if you see the curves, the way these tendrils curves, it suggests a hint of Makara. Now, you might be wondering, if Makara is so interesting by itself, why depict Makara in the form of a skeleton? I wish to answer that question, perhaps by making one last connection. Now, I talk about composite creature in Singapore. It's difficult not to be reminded of Merlion. And in 1999, the Straits Times actually published a series of commentaries about the social significance of Merlion. In this case, it's an article entitled Merlion and Makara Symbolize Protection. The connection between these two composite imagination is derived from an article written by Wilfred, also published in 1999, entitled How Merlion Legend Came About Omitted. Now, in this article, in this commentary, it's interesting that Wilfred said, if my memory does not fail me, it was a Mr. Kwok, originally from Malacca, who conceptualized the myth of the Merlion. The official narrative of the origin of Merlion is that it is designed by Alec Fraser Brunner in the 1960s, right? So you have here an alternative kinds of history and alternative kinds of memories. But of course, if memory does not fail, Wilfred, that is, all right? Now, we don't want to speculate, but let's follow the story of what Wilfred's trying to say. Basically, Mr. Kwok is someone from Malacca. So according to Wilfred, this Mr. Kwok, who is a designer, he stumbled upon a site of a Makara sculpture in Malacca. And in Malacca, there's only one Makara sculpture, and it's quite well known. Now, if you look at some of the literature about this sculpture, especially the literature produced by archaeologists, is a sculpture that is brought over from Singapore. So it's not fabricated in Malacca, it's brought over from Singapore to Malacca. And of course, if you're familiar with the visual stylistics of Makara, the Makara sculpture that's been shifted to Malacca from Singapore is of a Sumatran style, right? This is the image of the Makara sculpture now located in Malacca, shifted from Singapore. Now, what I'm trying to point out here is that these composite imagination challenge our ways, or challenge the flows of ideas, challenge the way we think about boundaries. So as Makara itself as a composite of animals, as a combination of animals. So you can see how this composite has traveled across different regions. The next question is, can we actually historicize the composite imagination of Merlion? In as much as we have historicized the idea of Makara, can we actually historicize Merlion? Is Merlion only a national icon? Can Merlion be denationalized? Can Merlion serve as this, if we locate Merlion in a broader spectrum of history, what other ideas of Merlion that precedes itself? What are the kinds of ideas that can link, that can connect dysmoralian to other kinds of composite imagination. So in as much as this skeleton of Makara is trying to celebrate the kinds of different connections that it can make, it is also a layman to all potential connections that have been and will be buried and fossilized by ever new types of boundary mechanisms that seems to govern the society today that's increasingly xenophobic and nationalistic. Thank you.